Hi there, welcome to the Athletic FC podcast. I'm Adam Leventhal. Tottenham have sacked the manager who delivered a first trophy in 17 years. So why has Postecogolou gone, and is Thomas Frank the man to replace him? Well, with me today we have the Athletic's Tottenham Hotspur writer Jay Harris and Seb Stafford-Bloor. Before we get stuck into this, gents, I just wanted just a short sort of elevator pitch of how you're feeling. The fact that Ange is no longer the Tottenham manager. Let's start with you, Seb. How are you feeling about this?
A little lost and conflicted. Because obviously I think for anybody roughly my age, I'm 40, about to turn 41, Ange Postecogolou will forever be associated with one of the high points of my Tottenham sporting life. And yet, you know, there is a very solid argument as to why he should have been relieved of his duties. And so it's a very strange moment. It doesn't really bear much of a description at the moment.
Okay, all right. We'll sort of pull on through a few of those threads in a moment. Jay, how are you feeling that you're not gonna see Ange when those press conferences start again?
Not massively surprised that he's gone. A tiny bit relieved in a sense, just because it feels like this had been hanging over Postecogolou and Spurs pretty much since the beginning of the year. It felt like this was probably always going to happen. The Europa League final victory changed things slightly. But there is a little bit of sadness. Me and Postecogolou didn't always get on, I think it's fair to say. But I think there was a mutual respect between us. And he said he'd win a trophy in his second season, and he did it. So I was actually intrigued to see what he would have done in that third year. But it's not going to happen.
You weren't alone in having a bit of a sort of an abrasive relationship with him. I think he sort of, he did have his jousts along the way, didn't he? So let's just rewind a second. Friday evening, we get confirmation that Spurs have parted company with Ange Postecogolou. And that meant that we got a big read on The Athletic, a big insider's read about exactly what happened, one of those big juicy ones that you can get your teeth into. And it was entitled, Why Tottenham Sacked Ange Postecogolou, the manager who ended their 17-year trophy drought. That's the question to start off with, Jay. Why? Why did they get rid of him?
So in the statement that Spurs put out on Friday, they alluded to the league form, and in the eyes of many Spurs supporters, Seb's just alluded to it, the league form this season is irrelevant now. Postecoglou's gone into the pantheon of Spurs greats. He's done something which nobody thought he could do. Yes, it wasn't the prettiest of football at times on the way to the Europa League final victory, but it doesn't really matter. They won. And there were so many injuries this season. It's something we reported back on in January time, that it was just relentless and there were loads of different factors between it. So it felt like there were a lot of caveats for why the league season had been bad, Europa League had been good. But I said this multiple times, Spurs needed to take a step back and not make an emotional decision. If you look at their league form over the last 18 months, it's been horrendous. And the sort of sliding doors moment, for want of a better word, is going to be that infamous 4-1 defeat to Chelsea in November 2023, when it felt like the entire footballing community was watching that Monday night football game when it became 9 versus 11. All the Spurs players were on the halfway line, and Chelsea were just trying to chip it over the top for Nicholas Jackson to run onto it. And at the time, some people looked at it as Chelsea are ridiculously silly. It took them so long to work out how to beat Spurs. Other people said, fair play to Postecogolou. He's so wedded to his principles, he's not going to change anything. I think in the end that became a weakness since that game. Spurs have played 66 games in the Premier League, lost 34 times and taken 78 points. If you ignore the 6 relegated teams, that's the third worst record in that time. So Postecogolou will tell you that the league season was bad this year. Really, it's been something that's been going on for 18, 20 months. And what was in the beginning painted as a strength, this dedication to his philosophy, I think by the end, when teams had worked him out, it left him with little room to manoeuvre.
So Seb, yeah, let's look at this. Yes, 17 years, you've won a trophy for the first time, but you finished 17th, you lost 22 Premier League games. That's unforgivable. Daniel Levy has done what he should have done. Do you want to support that, or do you want to argue against it?
I won't argue against it. I'll offer some counterpoints.
Okay.
I think Postecoglou's worth is measured in a few different ways, and one of them is, and I think this would be true pretty much of any Tottenham fan you could speak to. When the full-time whistle went in Bilbao, I think, fans of other clubs punched the air, thumped their chest, celebrated. A lot of Tottenham fans just burst into tears. A lot of people I know had exactly the same reaction, and I think Danny Kelly said this on View from the Lane. He said, I didn't know how much I was carrying around with me until that happened. And I was speaking to one of my good friends last night. I won't name him, but he was in Bilbao, and he said I was sobbing at full time because, in those 17 years, okay, one part of it is the football story, right? The games you've lost, the disappointments you've dealt with, but also life, because that's a really long period in anybody's life. And Postecoglou can't be separated from what is something I'll probably never feel again. Right? I'm 40 years old. If I wait another 41, I don't know. I was a smoker for 15 years. I don't know, right? But it's very difficult to make a rational decision, to have time for the kind of, but 17th in the Premier League. I get it. Of course I do. But then you come back to this point, and there isn't really a way of winning this argument. What matters more to you? Winning, success, a football club being community, being associated and entwined with great moments in your life, moments that you'll remember forever. You'll remember exactly how you felt those specific moments, because to me, that's football. At the same time, for a lot of other people, including, I would dare say, everybody who owns and works at a football club, what matters more is finishing 6th or 7th, guaranteeing a revenue in a major European competition and moving forward, having the stability which allows you to strategically plan year to year. I get it. But it's about which side of that you fall on, and that's up to the individual fan. For me, I would take 17th and a European trophy for every season for the rest of my life. But that's just my opinion. And also, bear in mind, Adam, Tottenham fans have had the European stability, Premier League stability and no trophy thing for a long time. All the way through the Maurizio Pochettino era, his achievements were kind of invalidated by talking heads on TV and radio describing how actually it didn't really mean anything because he hasn't won anything. Doesn't matter. What's success? I've heard, a few ex-players say that in the past. So you can't really win. So as a supporter, you go with the thing that makes you feel happier and the thing which is richer, and that is the trophy. So, but this is my opinion. I'm sure everybody else has a different one.
But I think it holds a lot of weight, your opinion, because that is what it is like for a lot of supporters. I, as a Watford fan, for example, have never seen my team win a major trophy. Right. And if it happened, I would probably feel like you in that moment, like the Crystal Palace fans that we saw winning the FA Cup. It was fantastic, and it takes you beyond the mundanity of being a football fan, and are we going to finish here? Are we going to qualify for this? If you've been doing it time and time again. One person I wanted to bring in on this conversation, because he's mentioned in Jack Pitt-Brooks' article, which included additional reporting from Jay as well, was a guy called Jeremy Conrad, who bumped into Ange Postecogolou when he was on holiday after winning the Europa League, and he wrote him a letter, and I suppose it sums up what you were saying, that he said, Wednesday the 21st of May will forever be etched in our collective psyche. It made us smile wider, walk taller, and laugh louder. You've orchestrated a generational shift in how we feel about our club and how others view us. And Jay, it was interesting when Ange was on top of that bus and speaking to the fans, and he said, the next series is always going to be the best one. Do you think that there is an argument that it was such a big change for them to win a cup that things could very, very, very reasonably have been completely different next season? Or is that just pie in the sky thinking?
It's so hard to tell. I think one thing that's important to point out is that if you rewind 12 months ago, Spurs, broke their club record to sign Dominic Solanke, but otherwise they didn't do that much in the transfer window. And everybody said at the beginning of the season that this squad looked quite lightweight in some areas. And that's exactly what happened when the injury crisis hit. Guglielmo Vicario fractured his ankle in November against Man City, and Fraser Forster, who, was a leader in the dressing room and well respected in the dressing room, is now playing 6-7 Premier League games in a row. And I don't think that's a situation that Spurs wanted to be in. And that's why they signed Kinski in January. You had Lucas Bergvall and Archie Gray join in the summer, two very talented 18-year-olds, but 18 years old, coming from the Swedish top flight in the Championship. They needed time to grow into the team. So I think there's an argument that the team went through a lot of pain this year. There was a lot of development. Some players have kicked on massively. So this experience of winning the Europa League and sort of grinding through all these hurdles with injuries probably would have brought them closer together. And with the Champions League, would they have been able to ramp up their recruitment a little bit more this summer? Would they have been able to get the players that they missed out on last summer? Would they have been able to reset and go again? Quite possibly. I think it just comes down to the fact Postecoglou's whole philosophy is plan B is do plan A better. And I just think there were times where in the league he just got found out. There were too many games where he was slow to make changes and substitutions. The 3-2 defeat to Brighton in October is the perfect example of that. They were 2-0 up at half time. Brighton scored, I think, 3 goals in 20 minutes and the game was done. For me personally, there were just too many moments like that. So yes, the emotional weight of Bilbao and winning that trophy, I think would have united everybody. But my fear was that this would have been very similar to the Ten Hag FA Cup final situation where by October, Spurs haven't started particularly well and all the rumours about Postecoglou's future just come up all over again and you're sort of just stuck in this cycle and eventually Postecoglou goes.
So after Ange Postecogolou had gone, we were waiting to see, as we always do with managers leaving, whether any of the players were going to pin their colours to the mast. And we saw 2 prominent people do that in that Spurs dressing room in particular. Son Heung-min, James Maddison, very supportive, very sympathetic towards him. What have you made of the public shows of support? We've got 2 high-profile ones there, but there will have been others as well, Jay.
Yeah, so the one that jumped out to me as well was Guillermo Vicario, basically saying that from that very first call, right from the beginning, you always showed so much belief in me. And Solanke said something very similar. And we had heard stories before that Postecoglou is very persuasive when he's telling players to join the club. It's really interesting. He's obviously done something for this group of players, which, Brendan Johnson was talking about it, and so was Mickey van der Ven, both before and after the final, that when they joined Spurs, lots of people were joking to them saying, are you going to be trophyless for the rest of your career now? And that clearly was a weight on these players. So for Postecoglou to tell them, even when their form is awful in the league and lots of people are doubting them, that they're still going to get there, they're still going to do it, must have been quite powerful for them. I do think it's interesting because throughout the season, we've heard lots of different stories about Postecoglou's demeanour on the training ground. We've heard that he's not the most cuddly of characters, shall we say. He often watches training from the sidelines and he gets his assistants to do it. He likes to have that cold, hard separation from the players. He doesn't want to build a relationship with them, so he's much more clear focused on who should and shouldn't be in the squad. He's not making an emotional decision based on his relationship with a player. But clearly, that's not mattered. He still managed to cut through and build strong bonds with these players. There was a video package of, families sending in nice messages before the Europa League final. And clearly, all those things have just really connected this squad with the manager in a way which has taken me by surprise slightly. And Son is an interesting one as well, because Son's underperformed this season, it's fair to say, and Postecoglou's inherited quite like a tricky scenario about how to phase him out. But as you've mentioned, Son's referred to him as a legend forever. Son's worked under lots of managers with, let's say, a higher pedigree than Postecoglou in Mourinho, Pochettino, Conte, etc. But he's the one that's got it done. So clearly, there's a really strong bond. What's
your take on it, Seb? Because there will have been things coming out from the Tottenham dressing room, throughout the season that will have been feeding column inches over time when it really wasn't going well for Spurs. So, how does this sort of hang up for you?
Yeah, mixed, Adam. I think, this is the game, right? And so I think it's quite difficult to separate what we'll call kind of the sincere, shows of appreciation. I think you guys have mentioned some of them there. I think, a lot of what has been read has been, written with sincerity. I think these things become a little bit self-fulfilling over the days after sacking, though, because eventually there's a sort of tipping point at which you realise, who hasn't done one? Who hasn't gone to Instagram and put the kind of the gushing post on there? And so beyond that point, it's very hard to know what's being done for PR or appearance's sake. But I think, especially with some of the younger players, I think if you look at Leventhal, for instance, I think a different coach, say Antonio Conte was Tottenham coach this season and had been faced with the same crippling injury crisis. I don't think Leventhal plays. I think it's a kind of, but he'll be somebody else's problem in 3 or 4 years. Yeah. I'm not dealing with the kind of the rough edges in his game and the naiveties. And I think to Postecoglou's credit, he allowed Leventhal to play, allowed him to make mistakes because the season wasn't perfect, and allowed everybody just to focus on what a wonderful, talented footballer he is already, but is going to be in the future. And I think that was the value of his management. And I can very well believe what Lucas wrote on Instagram or X, or whichever medium it was. And Vicario the same. I spoke to him in pre-season in Korea, and he was talking about some of the criticism that he faced last season around his dealing with set pieces, and how he kind of became a topic of conversation in the national media. And he talked about his gratitude towards his coach and how much confidence he was given and how much support he was provided with. And so I can believe it. I just think it does always happen. I think you have to take these things with a little pinch of salt. Because also, remember, it's not always the player controlling the social media accounts. So sometimes it very much goes through the kind of the filter of the publicist.
Okay, well, let's talk about what does come next. And Jay, you wrote last week about the need for clarity. We now know, as David Ornstein has been reporting, that Tottenham are in contact with Brentford about Thomas Frank. How have we got to this point then?
Well, as far back as March, myself and Jack Pitt-Brooke were reporting that Postecoglou's long-term future was in serious doubt, and that Thomas Frank was a potential option along with Marco Silva and Bournemouth's Andoni Iraola. At the time, we were being told that Iraola was the number one target, but it looks like he's gonna stay at Bournemouth. So it's just emerged that Thomas Frank is the leading contender. I think we're now at a stage where we expect Frank to be confirmed as the Spurs manager. We don't know when that's going to happen. And I think at this point in time, there probably still needs to be negotiations about how much it's going to cost to get him out of Brentford, which members of his backroom staff go with him. But it just feels like all roads are heading in one direction. And it's going to be Frank ending his near 9-year association with Brentford, 7 as head coach, to join Spurs.
We're going to get stuck into this in more detail in a moment. But just, Seb, I want you to take me into your mind and tell me, when you hear Thomas Frank, Tottenham manager, how does that make you feel?
Yeah, if we explore those dark recesses, we have 2 reactions. The first is, I've got all the admiration in the world for Thomas Frank as a coach. I think he's a terrific coach, and I think what he's done at Brentford often is kind of understated. When you look at what he's had resource-wise versus what he's been able to achieve, I think he's done miraculously well. And look back to where Brentford were. I mean, we now just consider them a Premier League team. Well, he put them there. The other thing I'd say, and this is not really connected to Thomas Frank, and this is nothing really to do with him, and it shouldn't detract from his candidacy, but he is a candidate for the Tottenham job because he is overperformed with a team that is not spending a lot of money. And that's why he is top of Tottenham's list. And so if you look this season, I think by the time the financial results are made clear, or the kind of the data is shown, I think Tottenham are spending around the 7th or 8th highest amount on wages. And so if you add Frank into that, then the cynical part of you as a fan goes, well, okay, but that's because the club want to continue spending at that level, but perhaps finish 6th or 5th in the Premier League. And that's quite an underwhelming feeling. Whether that's realistic or not doesn't matter. You have to remember, Spurs are coming off the back of winning a European final and going to the Champions League. And so, to go from that to we're back into kind of, finish above what we pay FC, that's quite difficult. But if you're going to get someone of that ilk, let it be Thomas Frank. He's a brilliant coach. I don't know nearly as much about him as Jay does, but all the sort of the human bits of his coaching that I've seen that have been shown, been made public, are incredibly impressive too. And so many of his players who seem to speak positively about him. Then it's a great appointment. But I think again, you can't ignore that second part, that sort of impulsive response to it, because Spurs have been here a lot of times before.
Jay, you spent 3 years covering Brentford under Thomas Frank. I've asked Seb about his suitability. What do you think?
I think I'm quite glad that he's about to receive this opportunity. I think it's overdue. He's come quite close to leaving Brentford on quite a few occasions. You know, Aston Villa were interested in him at one point. Manchester United and Chelsea liked him last summer. So it feels like he's been sort of patiently waiting. And as Seb alluded to earlier, Brentford are now going to be heading into a 5th season in the Premier League, which is remarkable when you look at their resources and you look at the players they've lost during that time. To keep improving and keep building is fantastic. I think the main thing for me is that Frank's a lot more tactically flexible than Postecogolou. We've already mentioned at the beginning of this pod that Postecogolou had this philosophy he was, strictly wedded to, 4-3-3, fullbacks pushing high up the pitch, wingers basically getting to the byline and whipping crosses back into the penalty spot area. I think I've seen Frank experiment from time to time in the Premier League. Their first 2 years, they were using a 3-5-2. You had Tony and Mbuemo up front, David Raya kicking the ball long, throw-ins. I remember Brentford beat Watford at Vicarage Road once via a throw-in, and we were next to each other and you weren't too happy about it. But I think that I bring that up not to wind you up, but to point out that Frank uses whatever's at his disposal. He's not a football snob. Brentford have been good on set pieces, good on long throw-ins, but also very good at playing out from the back, and that's what they've evolved into. They now play more of a 4-2-3-1. Visser and Mbuemo and Kevin Schade have been fantastic this season. They've all reached double figures in the Premier League. They're also very different strikers to Ivan Toney, who was a different striker to Ollie Watkins, who was different to Neil Maupay. So Thomas Frank knows how to adapt and seems to be able to get the best out of different players. I think my slight concern is that, there are two slight concerns. One, he's never experienced European football before. I think he got into the preliminary rounds of the Europa League when he was in charge of Brøndby back in the day, but being dropped straight into the Champions League is going to be a test, and having to play multiple games a week. I think Brentford played 41, 42 games in the Premier in all competitions last season. Spurs had 60, so that's a big step up in intensity. And then the other aspect of it, which we shouldn't overlook, is Brentford are an incredibly well-run club. They've had that consistency from the owner, Matthew Benham, the director of football, Phil Giles, and the technical director, Lee Dykes. They've got so many good processes and the structure and the strategy in place. Thomas Frank's admitted before that many managers or head coaches could be a success at Brentford because of the environment and culture that's built there. So has Thomas Frank succeeded because he's a fantastic manager in a fantastic environment, or is he a good manager in a fantastic environment and they've raised him to another level? I think that's going to be very interesting to see. He's massively helped at Spurs by the fact that the sporting director, Johan Lange, who I mentioned earlier, they're both from Denmark. They both worked at a Danish club called Lyngby together 2 decades ago. So he's going in with a pre-existing relationship, which I think will be crucial to his chances of success and long-term survival. But he does not have the same safety net that he has at Brentford. Thomas Frank lost 8 of his first 10 games at Brentford. If he does that at Spurs, I think we can all confidently say he won't last long.
Yeah, I think Jay makes a really good point. So my Tottenham fan brain goes back to Juan de Ramos when he was appointed, because that was, at the time, Juan de Ramos was extremely well thought of because of what he'd achieved at Sevilla. And yet Spurs appointed him without really, it seemed, doing their due diligence on what had made him successful there. Because Juan de Ramos at the time was really a product of so many things being done well at Sevilla, including recruitment, that when he came to Spurs, he couldn't replicate any of that success because the conditions weren't the same. And so you do worry about that a little bit. The other question I had, and I'm not sure what kind of where this is going, is Jay mentioned like the alignment at a club like Brentford where all the different departments seem to complement each other, and that seems to be the root of the success, with the head coach as the employee at the center of it, becoming the kind of the public face of it. Now, to me, like, it's interesting that, for instance, that just a year after being appointed, Scott Munn has been let go. He's already gone. Yes, Johan Lang is there, but there remain rumours that Fabio Paratici is on his way back. Now that's a little bit of a red flag to me, because you have a data-orientated person like Lang, and then you have a deals guy and a connections guy like Paratici, versus a new coach who has thrived in a data-led system before and who was very open-minded towards it. Now, the conversation in football should never really be about, is data good or not? It's not the right question. The right question is, does everybody believe in what you're trying to do or not? And if that alignment doesn't exist at Spurs, it's not going to work. It's just not going to work. So those are the questions that I have. Maybe there are solutions that the club have not made public yet that will reveal themselves in time. I hope so. But it shouldn't take too much to kind of, to accept that Frank, and I mean this in no way to be a kind of a denigration of what he's achieved. He's a product of his environment, and that's a compliment to Brentford, and Spurs should heed that.
There has been a lot of churn, hasn't there, in terms of recruitment at Spurs over the last few years. Obviously, you mentioned Paratici. There were, huge investigations in Italy, which caused him to have to step away, suspended, etc., etc. Lang's come in. Jay, from your point of view, do you think that Frank will be able to make his own mark now? He's ready to step up and be able to negotiate what may well be choppy waters, or certainly different waters.
Yeah, I hope so. I think, again, what we should point out is that Frank is very good at managing up as well as managing down and managing a squad. Like I said, he has a fantastic relationship with Matthew Benham, Lee Dykes and Phil Giles. And of course, I'm sure they would have argued over signings over the years, but they've always come to the right conclusion. Having Langer on side will help. Certainly some of Spurs' signings over the last couple of years have been pinched under the noses of Brentford anyways. People like Brennan Johnson and Archie Gray, Brentford followed and made multiple bids for over the years. So there's clearly a degree of similarity. If you look at what Spurs have done since Langer was appointed as sporting director, which I, off the top of my head, was November 2023, there's been a real focus on signing players under the age of 23. So Antonin Kinski from Slavia Prague, Bereval, Archie Gray, Solanke's probably the exception to that rule. So they've got a very young squad. You've got Wilson Odobert, Matisse Tell if he joins permanently from Bayern Munich. And that's basically what Thomas Frank has been doing at Brentford for his entire time. He's been taking players under the age of 23 and developing them. He's done it with David Raya, Visser, Mbuemo, Ivan Toney, Keane Lewis Potter, Nathan Collins. You just need to switch the names over. He's going to be working with a better quality of player in more testing circumstances. Mikkel Damsgaard's been a revelation for Brentford this season, but his first 2 years were really underwhelming and really difficult as he negotiated a new culture, a new country, and a really complicated injury history because he's got an arthritic condition. So in an environment like Brentford, you can sort of be patient with a player like Damsgaard. You can allow them and give them the time and space to breathe and eventually grow and become, I think he got 10 assists in the Premier League this season, which was the third or fourth best record. I don't think Thomas Frank would get the same time and space to do that with a player at Spurs. The demands are different. So yes, he'll work in the sense that his development background, used to be Denmark's under 15s, under 16s coach, will help him with the project, but also he needs to get results quickly. And those sort of things, it's difficult for them to coexist. So how he balances that will sort of determine whether he's a success or a failure.
Jay, is he going to potentially be key in bringing Bryan Mbuemo with him, do you think? Because obviously we've reported, and we had on a recent podcast, David Ornstein talking about Manchester United edging closer to signing Bryan Mbuemo. Could this be a spanner in the works for Manchester United? And Thomas just goes, no, come with me. We know each other and we can settle in together. Come and keep me company.
Possibly. I'm not entirely convinced that will be the case. I think Mbuemo has interested Tottenham even before this Frank. Well, I know Frank's not confirmed yet, but we very much think it's going in that direction. But I think Spurs have liked him for a long time regardless. I don't know if he would be enough to sway them, because Mbuemo's a great player, but Brennan Johnson is Spurs' Europa League final winning hero. He scored that goal. I think there are question marks about Brennan Johnson's game. But I also think that maybe that was down to the way that Ange Postecogolou wanted him to play in that system. He wanted him to stay high and wide. So I do wonder if Thomas Frank will look at Brennan Johnson, a player he was desperate to sign for Brentford over the course of about 2 years from Nottingham Forest. If actually he'll say, I'd love to work with Brennan Johnson. I don't need Mbuemo on the right wing as well. I've got Brennan Johnson there. I'm going to be more focused on improving and developing him. I'd almost argue Spurs need to look at the left wing more because you've got Son, Tell, Odebear, Mikey Moore. None of them are peak age players. Lots of them are development players. Son's on the decline. I think that's probably a bigger issue than bringing in Mbuemo, who might just block Johnson's pathway.
Final question to you, Seb, because obviously we're talking as if Thomas Frank has already been appointed. He's already got his training kit. We're talking about Brian Mbuemo following him. None of this has been confirmed, by the way. Having come from a cosier club like Brentford, a smaller club like Brentford, do you think Thomas Frank will deal with the tumble dryer of Tottenham well?
Yeah, I mean, I've never seen anything which makes me think he wouldn't. I think he seems to be a really balanced person. I think he seems thoughtful and intelligent. His man management is very good. I don't think there are a lot of egos at Tottenham. So I don't think there is a little bit of a difference in playing staff in terms of what some of those players are earning. Yes, but I don't think you're talking about going from Brentford to Real Madrid. It's not that. I think where the difficulty lies is not really in how he handles it, but the situation, because when the new season starts, there are going to be a lot of people in the stadium who still hanker after Ange Postecogolou and are still kind of emotionally in Bilbao. That's really, really hard. And so in many ways, whilst Tottenham have had worse teams, isn't that the truth, in my 4 decades, and they've had worse positions and they haven't been playing Champions League football, you could probably make a case that this is one of the hardest times to become a new Tottenham coach in recent memory. And I think that's the thing that he has to overcome. And what I will say, though, is I think if you can deliver pretty quickly, if you can show competence, flexibility, tactical acumen, knock over a couple of big teams in the Champions League in the autumn, I think people get on board very, very quickly. And Ange Postecogolou becomes this sort of historic legacy figure who allows this new era to happen. And I think there are a few people far smarter than me making this point during Postecoglou's reign, where they said, well, this might be the kind of the cultural reset full of all the kind of inefficiencies and flaws that you need to move towards something a little bit more sustainable in the future. And I think perhaps it doesn't take much to convince people that is in fact the direction, and that is in fact, Postecoglou's place in Tottenham history alongside the Europa League trophies. So yeah, it's going to be hard though. And I think also Tottenham summers are really difficult, really, really hard, because I think it's only June and people are already a little bit nervous. We're already hearing conversations starting with comments like, well, we haven't done anything for 2 weeks, and look at what Man City are doing, and Liverpool are about to sign Florian Wirtz, and they've already signed Jeremy Frimpong, etc. Tottenham have done nothing, and it does not take much for people to get really, really nervous and really, really negative. And these are difficulties, but you can't know. You can't know. Antonio Conte did not deal well with being Tottenham head coach. Jose Mourinho did not deal well with it. Pochettino did, but less so over time as it became clear that he wasn't perhaps going to get the backing that he wanted to. Nuno didn't deal well with it. You can't know until someone's in situ, Adam.
Can I just say quickly as well, I made some really great points there, because I do think replacing Postecogolou is really, really tricky. Like I said, he had started badly at Brentford, and he also started badly at Brøndby. I don't think he won any of his first 8 games. So not exactly giving him a ringing endorsement right now. I think what helps him is that there's no international competition this summer. So he will be able to go into pre-season, and they go on tour to Hong Kong and Korea, but I think they're only there for a week, which is shorter than last year when they went for 2. He will get a significant chunk of time to work with these players at early doors. Whereas last year, I can remember a lot of Spurs players were all over the place. Romero got to the Copa America final. Lots of players got to the latter stages of the Euros, including Mickey van der Ven. So I think that will help Thomas Frank. I'm intrigued to see how he handles the media, because, like I said, covered him for 3 years, and he was always fantastic, very warm, very friendly. But a lot of the time, there were not that many people in those press conferences, especially for Brentford away games, it'd often be me, the only Brentford reporter. At Spurs, he's going to have 10, 12 people turn up every Friday to hear his thoughts. It's going to go on for ages. We're going to pick over the same wounds over and over again. And it'll be interesting to see if he still bats those sort of questions away and deals with it well, or if that step up in focus and scrutiny, if he finds that a little bit more challenging. He said multiple times, he said it in an interview with me before, that he's had close to the perfect football life at Brentford, and that he'd only leave if it was for a special project. It's fair to say Spurs will be a special project. It's going to be a difficult one, and I don't think he'll have close to the perfect football life anymore. But I think he'll have the right attitude and try to make a success of it.
I hadn't thought of that until you said it, Jay. But if Brian Mbuemo doesn't join him, at least he'll have you there. Welcome him to the club. He'll see you in the news conference, and he'll go, Jay, it's so good to see you. So
I have had a few Brentford fans message me on social media and say, can we get you back? Because otherwise Spurs have nicked our athletic reporter. They've nicked Archie Gray and they've nicked Thomas Frank, which did make me laugh.
Well, look, it's been great to get both of your insights. Jay, Seb, thank you very much indeed. And thanks to you for watching. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and drop us a comment. As always, thanks for now. We'll see you on the next one.
If you want to watch more episodes of the show, please subscribe to the channel. We'll be joined by the likes of David Ornstein, Matt Slater, Adam Crafton, Carl Anker, and plenty more through the season. If you'd like to listen to the episodes in full in audio form, search The Athletic FC wherever you get your podcasts from.